G'day, g'day. How are we? Oh yeah? Yes, Last of Us 2 is out and it's both a new benchmark in gaming and apparently also a failure depending on which extreme you come across. I'm not going to jump on either bandwagon. I had the idea to share my thoughts after reading this post on the subreddit True Gaming. Like most normal people, it's simply an opinion on the game or situation that opens the forum for further discussion. A welcome change from the very vocal mobs across social media. True Gaming itself is usually pretty good for a read, much better than the karma whoring R Gaming, where people recirculate the same goddamn memes over and over for likes. And some of those memes I remember getting recycled on Facebook pages back in roughly 2010. So, same shit, different day. Back to the topic at hand. So, for context, I have not played The Last of Us 2 myself. I was a big fan of the story for the first game, but didn't enjoy the gameplay a whole lot. I have watched all the cutscenes for the second game though, so I'm not going to spout random shit and be completely misinformed. I'm just going to give my thoughts based on what I actually have experienced. This video will cover the Reddit post and then I'll dive into my issues with the game's story. Two dicks, one mouth, as the saying goes.
A lot of people would agree that the inherent unique quality of video games is the interactive aspect, and the control you get of the characters gives a unique experience to passively watching something. This is kind of a crude representation, and I can't say I entirely agree with this sentiment, but I'm sure we can all agree that most gamers feel this way. So it strikes me as a very odd juxtaposition that it's also so common for people to watch streamers, and by virtue of doing so, turning that active experience into a less than ideal passive viewing experience, and then thinking you've engaged with the game enough on a fundamental level in order to give your critiques. At this point, you have not engaged with the game on the base level that the creators wish for you to do so. You have effectively judged the movie with, I imagine it's supposed to say without, watching it, judged the book without reading it, judged the play without attending.
Personally, I think there's still discussion that can be had with regards to all aspects of a game without having played it. I didn't need to play Fallout 76 to understand it was bug-ridden, stiff, empty, and ugly to look at. I don't need to play The Last of Us to know that shooting isn't going to feel great for me. Shooting with a controller? No thanks. But realistically, that side of the discussion is going to be a bit more limited due to the nature of gameplay. You're not always going to have the full story of how a game plays by simply watching it. The sense of speed, accuracy, and impact in Doom Eternal isn't fully appreciated until you're able to play it. At least that's how I feel. It's an anecdotal point to make, but I'll at least speak for myself in that gameplay for Doom, both 2016 and Eternal, didn't fully represent what I would actually be experiencing once control was given over to me. In terms of Fallout 76, when I did play it, it played exactly like how the gameplay looked. Story, however, can absolutely be critiqued by simply watching someone else play the game. Streaming with commentary or just watching the cutscenes themselves, it can be the same.
I think many would argue that you wouldn't be able to necessarily critique the gameplay, but surely you'll be able to at least address your story criticisms. But I don't buy this either. I think any work needs to be assessed in an optimal environment. A loud idiot in a movie theater can ruin the entire viewing experience for you and detach you from the narrative. So I also fail to see how some yelling idiot waving his arms around, screaming about bits and tips, talking about random bullshit with chatters, and dancing anime characters popping up on screen whenever someone subscribes is an optimal setting to enjoy the narrative. You're already detached, and I think some of the power of narrative and character-driven works is that emotional investment. You may be willing to overlook a couple of nitpicks in other categories if you found yourself genuinely moved by the characters or story, but this detachment that's caused by distracting streamers inhibits that.
I see OP's point here as addressing a very specific situation that I don't think always applies, and it's not the common experience for people when watching streamers. This more so seems like their response to a single streamer. A loud, obnoxious streamer who talks all over the content most definitely will take the story experience away from viewers, but I dare say that would be a small number of people acting like that. From my personal viewing experience, a streamer will usually keep quiet during dialogue and even leave subtitles on for viewers. The opportunity to learn the story alongside the one streaming isn't completely lost in this regard. The moviegoer calling things out in the cinema isn't a fair comparison either. I see a streamer talking mid-cutscene every now and then, and making comments towards the characters and their lines, as similar to my first viewing of Justice League, where myself and my missus were looking at each other, rolling our eyes and making fun of the movie every time something cringe or ridiculous happened.
There's also the fact that watching someone not having a good time is really not fun at all. One of my favourite films is Umbrellas of Cherbourg, I believe it's pronounced. Classic 1964 French musical. It's one of the best films I've ever seen, and I will never watch it with anyone else. Know why? Because I don't want to hear this, why are there subtitles? Why are they always singing? Why is her voice so shrill? How long is this? Why did she do that? I hate her. She's such a bad character. That ending had no closure. Now imagine that, but for a 20 to 100 hour game. Yeah, no thanks. That ruins my experience. And I feel like people underestimate how suggestive that can be. If you're watching something with someone shitting on it the entire time, you're probably going to be harder on it as well than you would be just experiencing it fresh on your own. This is also why I don't take the "I watched a stream, I know everything about the game" thing seriously, because I don't know how that streamer engaged with the game and how that may have affected how you perceived it.
I agree that a streamer could have a suggestive impact on your own view of a game in a way that makes you more critical, where you may have ignored or perhaps missed certain pieces of the plot or issues of the gameplay. I still see this as fine depending on the situation. If you were to watch someone not very good at video games die over and over, and the whole time they complained that the controls were laggy, the animations are not great, or the inputs just didn't work entirely, then you'd likely walk away with a negative outlook of the game and probably assume that's how the game is, that it just doesn't play very well. Therein lies the issue with watching instead of playing. If a story involves plot holes, however, you're not going to have to play the game yourself to confirm this. You're watching the exact same plot unfold at the same time as the streamer. If they point out a plot hole, it's up to you to agree or disagree. You've been watching the same story unfold. I feel as though incorrectly pointing out story beats will likely be picked up on by viewers who have been watching the same thing. I've had just that happen from streaming a game to my sister, where I've incorrectly recalled a piece of story, but she remembers the event as it actually happened. If you don't enjoy listening to someone complain over and over about a movie, game, a play at the theatre, or whatever else it may be, that's to be expected. But you won't be misinformed for simply watching a plot unfold whilst someone complains about said plot. So, onto my opinion of the game's story. Spoiler alert. I don't like the story. The first game was a treat, even though the gameplay wasn't great, but the story for the second game I didn't find enjoyable. I'll skip pieces of the overall plot and ignore some characters entirely just because I want to get to my main gripes. For an even more detailed overview of the writing of this game, I recommend Critical Nobody's video. A lot of what he says I agree with. There are just more major issues I want to personally talk about that stuck out more. This doesn't occur till much later during one of the many flashbacks, but I want to cover it now for the sake of discussion. Joel tells Ellie the truth about what happened to the Fireflies, and understandably, she is pissed off and resents him for it. So you start the game, and after a couple of hours, a character named Abby kills Joel in front of Ellie while Tommy lays unconscious in the background. Instead of killing the two as well, they are left as the mission was to hunt down Joel only. Abby is the daughter of the surgeon that Joel kills at the end of the first game, just before taking Ellie away. Ellie, rightfully upset, sets out to hunt her down and get revenge. After amassing a long kill streak, she comes face to face with Abby and is held at gunpoint. Whilst held at gunpoint, the story stops and rewinds to show you events from Abby's point of view. I found this to be way too jarring and a bit of an odd point to expect players to hold on to their suspense. It'd be the equivalent of, Star Wars spoiler, Vader just about to slice Luke's hand off, but instead, they clash sabers, stare at each other for 3 seconds, and the movie cuts to black. The first half of Phantom Menace plays out, and then the next 2 movies released are Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, before playing the final 20 minutes of Empire at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and then finally releasing Return of the Jedi as a 1-hour epilogue episode where the Emperor is allowed to live and everyone goes back home. I am fully behind the story of Abby, and I don't think her side is uninteresting at all, but the delivery was botched. More effective would have been if the game starts with you playing as Abby in the hospital from the first game as Joel is going around killing everyone. It could have been both an effective intro to show Joel's character from the point of view of someone directly impacted by his selfishness and violent nature, and also a neat little intro to the controls of the game for navigation and stealth. Show us her path to revenge so we can learn about her character and at the same time challenge players' thoughts on Joel by refocusing on the fact that he has done some terrible things in the past. He's a beloved character, but some of the interesting discussions about the first game is based around whether or not he's the bad guy for doing what he did. Was Ellie going to die for nothing, or did Joel ruin the best chance humanity had at developing a cure? Seeing his actions from this point of view could have been an interesting twist to motivate players to continue this girl's story and see it through, or challenge those that love him so much with a new take that goes against the norm when it comes to sequels. Come round to playing as Ellie hunting Abby down, and it could have been a very interesting situation where players now aren't sure about Ellie's thirst for revenge and who is right or wrong. When the timeline catches back up to the present where Ellie is held at gunpoint, Ellie and Abby fight it out, but not before Joel's brother Tommy is shot in the back of the head and seemingly killed. Interestingly enough, Abby doesn't even have her finger on the trigger during each shot, which is an odd detail for the devs to miss, considering their immense dedication to all the little details in previous games. Ellie is beaten to a pulp and her pregnant girlfriend Dina is almost killed by Abby before they are shown mercy for a second time and left alone. Fast forward and Ellie, along with Dina and Dina's baby, are living in a house as a family. Tommy is still alive, although he's lost some functionality in one of his legs and he's completely lost one of his eyes. He rocks up and he mentions to Ellie that he's got info on where Abby is now, and gets frustrated that she won't go out there to finish what she started because he himself can't go out there. She then decides, much to the dismay of Dina, to hunt her down again anyway, and once found, she forces Abby to fight her by threatening the life of Abby's friend Lev after saving her from certain death and almost just letting her go. They fight, Ellie has 2 of her fingers bitten off and is mere moments away from drowning Abby before she has a flashback to an image of Joel and lets her live while she cries to herself. The memory you find out shortly was her telling Joel that she would like to try and learn to forgive him for what he did. The whole sequence of events from Ellie creates a massive disconnect from a storytelling sense. As a player, you kill so many people, but narratively there doesn't seem to be much of an impact on the mental state of the characters until a specific character is killed or harmed in a cutscene, and the game doesn't really delve into the consequences of killing so many people either. If Naughty Dog really wanted to have the story make a bit more sense, it would have been nice to be able to go through the game without killing a single soul. Because it's not until Abby's moments away from dying that Ellie finally decides to forgive and forget. Emphasis on the forget part, it seems, seeing as she already took the opportunity to start her life fresh and claimed to have understood why Abby killed Joel. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I've been able to find, a no-kill run isn't possible in the game. Remember, I watched all the cutscenes and some of the in-game dialogue during exploration. I didn't watch a full 20 to 30 hour playthrough. The forgiveness shown and thoughts the game seems to want you to have doesn't seem earned. The constant flashbacks, cut in the middle of the game, disconnect between story and gameplay, and the sheer length of sections that are added for padding only detracts from what could have been an enjoyable storytelling experience. Overall, the game deals with filler the same way a typical shonen anime does. There is way too much fluff taking up the plot, and the game's length seems to be long for the sake of being long. If the long and drawn out story was to work, it would need a narrative with a better sense of pacing. Cutting to black for a flashback in the way it's been done here comes across as a massive detour for a character arc that could very easily be summarized in a couple of short hours and still get the purpose of her character across. Ellie's motivations seem to flip back and forth on a dime, and no major attention is ever brought to the mass killing she took part in to get to the person that set her on this path in the first place. There are some really great moments in the story and the voice acting is absolutely on point, but the writing brings down the experience so greatly that I can easily see players losing motivation to keep playing and growing bored or frustrated with it. I don't see this game as a masterpiece like others do. I don't dismiss their opinion on it though. That's what I like to encourage. If someone thinks I misunderstood something, I encourage you to let me know how, where, and why. This game didn't have to feature you killing people. Earlier this year I played and finished Disco Elysium for the first time. You don't have to kill a single soul in that game. You don't even have to so much as physically harm someone. The gameplay and story were designed as a pair and were developed to work in tandem. For The Last of Us 2, it's almost like one person wrote Ellie's story, another wrote Abby's, and then a third team was set aside to complete half of the gameplay. Vague dot points from each team were then handed across, and a final product was created out of those dot points. That's kind of how it seems due to the disconnect that I mentioned earlier. Speaking of Disco Elysium though, if you're interested in great storytelling in video games, look no further than that game. So far it has the best writing I've seen in a game. Planescape Torment is in my backlog though, so I'll see how they compare. It sucks that the writing in Last of Us turned out how it did, as Naughty Dog has the capability to do some great things in games. In terms of cinematics, they have some of the best, but much like Uncharted and Nathan Drake having to re-earn the trust for Elena every fucking game, the writing leaves a lot to be desired. Let me know your thoughts, and until the next video, have a good one.